development class. So in Module 1, we're going to be looking at the introduction to web and the internet. Now, the objective of this module is to enable students to understand how the internet and web work, to understand one of the best web framework for Particle, which we'll be using the ExpressJS for this course, right? The ExpressJS framework for this course, and to describe what the hypertext markup language, the cascading style sheet, and the JavaScript are used for, right? And then to set up our web development environment for the software which we'll be building for this course, right? Now let's look at this understanding the web. Now, when you open a web page, right, so the hypertext transfer protocols, which this is actually the domain name, right? Let's assume that example.com is the domain name. So when your browser, which is a client side, sends a request, now the browser can be it's an application software, right? It can be a desktop application or a mobile application software. So the web application needs this browser to run effectively, and this is a client, right? So when the browser sends an HTTP request to the server response processes the request and send back an HTTP response, which can be HTML, JSON, XML files, and etc. So the browser displays the response. So the analogy of everything here is the client makes a request. So it can be of any application software that the client is actually using to make that request. So when you make the request, the server processes the request and returns response back to the browser. So that is how it works, right? So we're going to be looking at some web frameworks. Now, what is a web framework? A web framework is a set of tools, libraries, and rules that make it easier to build web application. Or we can say a framework is a set of tools, libraries, and rules that make it easy to build applications, right? But since we actually live in a web application here in this course, so that's why we have frameworks for web application. We also have frameworks for desktop application. We also have frameworks for mobile application. But this web application class, and the scope of this class is actually for web only, right? Now, a web application provides a foundation, like a basic structure and organization. So, visible code for common tasks like routing, forms, session. We can actually reuse codes, right? So, best practice for security, maintainability, and performance. So, instead of building everything from scratch, a framework gives you a pre-built skeleton for your app. Now, let's look at the reason why we use framework. Okay, we have actually explained how the first one is routing. You manually check your path, right? So this actually built in routing system. You manually check your paths. Without framework, you manually check your URL paths. Now, built-in routing framework. Let me just show you guys an example. Okay, let me run 3443. Is it running? It's not running, so let me run it here. cd cd 9 npm starts. Okay, let's use this. Let me run this so that I see something. Okay, now you can see this, right? Now this page is actually indexed with HTML, so you can see something like this, right? You can see something like this near the HTML, right? Now the routing helps us to hide the extension files of the extension HTML files, right? So you can't actually see. Once I click on login, right, what you see is signing. So you can you're not saying sign in with HTML. Now you're not saying sign the HTML. So that is the advantage of using a framework. Although even if you're not using a framework, you can still configure it from the scratch, right? If you don't like to use a framework. But in this our application here, we use the Express framework. So routing, you manually check your paths, but with framework, built-in routing system. Now database. So normally back in the days, we normally write some complex SQL queries, but now with framework, we have the object relational mapper that handles it. Now, object relational mapper actually is for the relational database management system. So, it's a library that enables you to write complex queries without even knowing SQL code. Although as a student, it's necessary to learn this, right? Because this ORM, how it works is when you write the code, it's being translated back to this, right? So, but with framework, you don't actually need to learn this, right? But as a developer, it's still necessary to know this, right? You need to know this. So security, it handles encryption and validation manually. So you need to be very good to be able to do this, but frameworks they already have built-in protections, right? Now structure, you invent your own folders. So they follow a standard pattern. Now, but in this part, you can decide to create your folder. Even if you're using a framework, you can explicitly design your pattern the way you want it. Like ExpressJS give you the room to actually design the pattern the way you want it, right? Now for speed, slow setup, right? This is quick scaffolding. Now let's look at some types of web frameworks. So we have two types of web frameworks, which are the front-end frameworks and also the back-end frameworks. Now this table 3 contains the front-end frameworks, and a good example of the front-end frameworks are React.js, right? Vue.js. React.js is actually component-based UI used by Facebook. Then Vue.js, JavaScript, which is lightweight and flexible. Angular, which is TypeScript, and it's an enterprise grade used by Google. And we have those Feds, which also use JavaScript, which compiles to pure JS for performance. Now, the front-end JS handles layout and visuals, user interaction, communication with APIs. Now you can see from my application here, now this is what we call the front end. This is what the user sees, right? So everything you see here is HTML, right? It's just pure HTML and JavaScript, right? We do actually use any front-end framework for this, right? Because we just use the pure HTML and JavaScript. That's what I'm going to be showing you guys how we actually build this, right? Okay. Now, user interaction, communication with APIs, right? So the front-end frameworks can easily communicate with the API. So if you go to my code, let me show you guys something in this code here. So you can see we have a JS here, and you can see how this sign-in JS is actually consuming this API. So this is the API which was written, right? This is the API, so you can see how the JS consumes this API here, right? That is what we mean here. So communicating with APIs, right, using fetch or async. So that is how the front-end frameworks work. Now let's look at some popular backend frameworks. Although we have so many backend frameworks, these are the popular ones in Africa and Nigeria that we currently use, right? Even in America and all over the world. So these are more of the popular frameworks. So the first one is ExpressJS. Now ExpressJS makes use of the Node, which is a runtime for JavaScript, right? So it's lightweight and fast for APIs, right? It's lightweight and fast for APIs. Now, Django, Flask or Flask API, this uses Python programming language. They are secured, full features, and rapid development. Now, this is actually good for AI applications, advanced AI applications, right? Then we have the Laravel, right? It's very popular, which is the PHP programming language. It's elegant syntax and uses the model view controller pattern. And we have the Spring Boot for Java programmers, which is the enterprise level strongly typed. Then we have the Ruby on Rails, which uses Ruby as a programming language, which is convention over configuration. And we have, for the C# users, we have the ASP.NET Core, which is the Microsoft ecosystem, and this is very, very powerful. Now, backend framework actually handle routing and responses, right? So database interaction using the object relational mapper if using the relational SQL database management system. Now by default they have the authentication and session. Then we have the API creation and the business logic. Yes, we're going to be doing all this in this course here. We'll show you guys how to do this, right? Now, the common architecture for the web framework is actually the model view controller pattern, where the model manages data and database, which is user or the post, and Then the view handles user interface, right, which is HTML or the CSS, or you can call example templates. Then the controller processes requests and connects models and views using routes and the APIs, right? So the common architecture in the model view controller pattern is when you log into a website with the view, you fill the form. So the controller processes your data, then the model checks credentials in the database, and the view displays welcome message if success. So that is how it works, right? That is how it works. So let's look at advantage. I think let me just keep this. Well, I've already looked at the advantage of frameworks. The disadvantage of frameworks is actually the learning curve. So frameworks have their own rules, right? But as a developer, you can actually create your own rules, including if you are using a framework. But there are some frameworks that restrict you from doing that. The ExpressJS don't restrict you from doing that. So version updates can break codes. Some frameworks are heavy for small projects, right? Then over reliance can reduce understanding of core web principles. Okay? So our choice of framework here we're using is the ExpressJS, right? So the reason why we're using ExpressJS is the performance is actually fast, learning curve is easy, structure it gives is flexible, and the built-in tools is minimal, idea use APIs and microservices. But we're going to be using you can see this application, right? So we use ExpressJS for this. This application we use ExpressJS for this, and this is what we use ExpressJS for build the application using the ExpressJS framework. But most of our AI models were built in Python, which we actually run the APIs in the Flask framework and then call it to our consume it with our JavaScript here, right? So which I'm going to be showing you guys how we easily do it. Okay, now let's look at the introduction to NodeJS and ExpressJS. Now, what is NodeJS? Now, in NodeJS is a JavaScript runtime environment that allows you to run JS code outside the browser. So it lets you build backend applications using JavaScript. Now, what is ExpressJS? ExpressJS is a framework for NodeJS that simplifies building web servers, so it handles routing, middleware, and responses easily. Right. So the framework we're using is ExpressJS, right? So we're using Node.js, which is the runtime for JavaScript, right? That allows you to run JS code outside the browser. So with Node.js, we can be able to communicate with our database server and then receive receive requests from the front end, processes it, and then returns response, right? That's the reason why we're using this framework. I'm going to be setting it up here in this tutorial. Now let's look at the difference between why developers and big companies love Express. I think we have talked about this. It's fast, it's minimal, it's flexible. I can work with any database or front-end, huge ecosystem, thousands of middleware packages, easy to learn. It uses JavaScript same as front-end, and is scalable, suitable for small apps and enterprise APIs. Right? Now let's look at the difference between synchronous and asynchronous programming, right? So you can see that the framework we're using is actually synchronous. Okay, it's actually asynchronous in nature. Now, what is synchronous programming? In synchronous programming, tasks are executed one after another in sequence. So each task must complete before the next one starts. Like think of it like a queue in a bank. So each customer is served one at a time. So the next person must wait for the current transaction to finish. Now let's look at asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming allows tasks to run independently of each other. So a task that takes time, like reading a file or calling an API, runs in the background while the rest of the code continues. So think of it like a restaurant. So the waiter takes your order and moves to the next table, and the chef cooks in the background, right? So, and ExpressJS is actually synchronous in nature. So, why synchronous programming is important in web app? So, in web app, many tasks are the input output bound, waiting for something external. So, fetching data from the database, reading files, sending emails, making API calls, streaming videos. Now, if this were synchronous, the entire server would pause while waiting, slow and efficient. So, with asynchronous code, a Node.js server can handle thousands of clients at once and stream video. That's why most times the best, if you're designing an app like the video streaming, something like TikTok or Google Meets or any app that is actually real time, so it's advisable to use a good framework, especially a framework that uses JavaScript, which is asynchronous in nature, right? But if you're building apps like school portal management, right, so Django can work, Laravel can work effectively well, and Flask can work effectively well. But real-time apps like real charts, video streaming, exam one proctoring system where the videos are continuous recording. Now this is actually good using JavaScript, right? Because it's actually asynchronous in nature. Okay, using ExpressJS or any other frameworks that uses JavaScript. Now let's look at the practical implementation, right? So in this video, we're going to be setting our stuff up and running. So I'm actually using Windows to demonstrate this practically here. So the first thing I need to do is to go to my local disk here. Now this is I'll just go to my local disk, right click, new folder. So let me call this folder student information system. So let's assume we are building a simple student information system. So I have built a folder on my local disk here. Now let's open our Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code. Now Visual Studio Code is one of the popular integrated development environments, which is free and open source. So we're going to be using this not Visual Studio, right? So this Visual Studio Code that is lightweight and it can run anything, right? To build any kind of application. Now this is the empty Visual Studio, right? So I'll click on File, I'll click on Open, then I will locate that folder I created, which is Student Management. This is student information system. So I will click on Select Folder. So you can see now I have an open folder here without anything being set up, right? Now let's go to our PowerPoint slide. So for you to be able to start up with your ExpressJS, the first thing you need to do is to install NodeJS. Now this is the official website which is the HTTP NodeJS. So if I copy this one here and let's go to the site. Okay, so this is actually, so let's go to the PowerPoint slide again. So I'll copy this it's a bit not that fast, right? Now this is the site where the first thing you need to do is to download the Node.js. So when you click on download here, right, when you click on this download, you can easily download the Node.js. You can see download Node.js. So we have the window installer, which is .msi, right? You can click on it. So if you're not using Windows, you can select your platform here. Like you can select Mac, using Mac or Linux or this right here, right? So that is how the first thing we need to do. Now the next thing we need to do here is to, after we've done that, then is to check if Node.js and npm is actually on our system, right? So I'll go to my command like this, cmd, then let's type node version. So I'm currently running 22.17.0. So let's check whether on npm-v. This, the npm is 11.0.0. Now it's being set on my system. So when you install that, the same thing will happen. You check it via the command prompt, and you will see the version of the node and npm. Now let's create. I've already created my project, right? So the next thing to do is to initialize the node project by typing this in the terminal. So now npm init-y create a package.json file that stores information about your project and is dependency. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now these are Visual Studio Code, right, for our system management which I've created. Now the next thing I need to do here, right? Let's create a folder for application. So let me just call this student info. The reason why I'm creating the folder here because I will in the future we'll create our API which we have on another its own folder. But this one is just for the front end interface. That's what we're building here only. So I call it student info. Right. So now inside this I will create a file called there is a file that executes the entire program. It can be called the server.js, or it can be called index.js, or we can call it app.js. So let's stick with one. Let's call this let's stick with index.js. Like let's use index.js. So now this index.js will run the entire application, right? So I have the index.js in my student info folder, right? Then I will create another folder. I will call this folder public. Alright. Then this public will have our landing page, which is index.html. Then I will have my CSS folder here. Then I will have my JS folder here, like this. So all my CSS folders will be here. I'm going to be teaching you guys CSS styling in the next video tutorial. Right. So let's set this up. So I have my index.html here, my public folder. Now I'm going to have another folder inside the student info folder. So I'll call that one. Let me call it routes. So this is where I'm going to configure all the routes for each of the HTML files I'll be creating here in this application, in this web application student information system, right? So inside these routes, I can start to have, let me call it student.js, right? Inside the route. So this student.js will contain all the settings for the routing, right, for each of the HTML files. So instead of user saying something like this, instead of user saying signing.html, user can just use something like this, right? So it will hide them in this script here. So now I have the index.js inside my public folder, and I have this one that executes the entire application. Now the next thing I will do here is to set up, which is this one here, is to initialize our node project. Now let's initialize our node project. So I'll go to my terminal here, click on terminal, new terminal. Right now you can see that the terminal is actually pointing to the information system, but we have another folder here. Now we have the entire application here, which is student info. So I'm going to change the folder, change directory to the student info. Right, you can see it's not pointing there. Then I will initialize. I will set up my node. So I've set my node up. So if you open here, you can see it has actually created the package.js file. Right. Now you can see the name of the file is student info. This is version 1.0. Then this is the main. It means that this is the main file is executing first, which is index.html, index.js. Right. So yeah, we can add a doc. Let me add my name as the author. John Wendy. We're C. Okay, so this is a license, and the type of JS we're using is actually common JS. I'm going to be explaining this, right, what it means, right, as we move on in the lecture. So you can set a description here if I want to. So I've set it up. So the next thing to do is to install. Let's go to our point per slide. Next thing to do is to install ExpressJS. So install Express as a dependency, and this is equal to install Express. So it's npm install Express. So npm install Express. So it's installing, right? So it has finished installing, right? So we have actually installed it. So you can see that we have a new folder, which is node modules, that contains all the libraries we'll be using for this to build this application, right? Now let's go to the PowerPoint slide. Now we have done that. We've done the graph. We have initialized our node project. We have installed Express as a dependency, and then serving HTML files with ExpressJS. So our goal is to serve our static HTML files, which is the index.html. So use Express built-in middleware for static files, and create small project folder structure for our web app. That's we have already done that, right? Now let's look at the practical explanation of this, right? Now, the first line imports Express framework into your project, which is this first line here. So where we're going to be writing this is actually our main.js, right? Okay, so let's just follow this tutorial here. So we're going to be writing this in main.js. So this line imports the Express framework into our project. So let me just write it here. Now, where's my this is Visual Studio, right? Now I'll go to the index.js, and so this line into our web app, right? That's the first line, which is this is a variable express, and this is actually what we're passing, right? So it imports Express framework into our web app, right? Now let's go to the next line. Now this imports Node.js built-in path module, so you don't need to install it anymore. So it comes with Node.js automatically. Now the path module helps you handle files and folder paths safely. So whether your computer uses Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, right? So this part helps you handle it safely and effectively and efficiently, right? So which is a path, right? Then let's look at the next step. Now this next step here is you are creating an Express application, right, which is like to a web browser. So think of an app like a web engine. So you use it to define pages, routes, and how your server should respond to visitors, right? So now this is what we use, right? Now we have actually called our Express. Remember, this is the Express we imported, right? And this is where we call it. So this app is what we are trying to be running here in this index.js, right? Now let's look at this one here. So we have the practical explanation continues, which is the app.use express the static app.join directory public, right? Now this directory name is actually a special variable that means the current folder where the files lives, right? The current folder where the files live. So our files is actually in the public folder, right? So if you go to our Visual Studio here, so you can see we have a public folder, right? We have a public folder here, and that is where all our files are, right? You can see we have our landing page, and I'm going to be creating another folder that will contain the sign-in, the layout pages in this application, because in this tutorial we are creating a full web application software for student management system, right? So when we are done with the front end, we'll look at the back end, right? Now let's go to the PowerPoint slide, and we have explained this, right? So then you pass the join. This joins your current folder with the public folder, right? So Express know where to find your HTML files, which the HTML files are actually in the public folder, right? Now Express.static tells Express serve everything in this folder directly, like the HTML, CSS, image, and JS when someone visits the website, right? Then the app.use means apply this rule to every incoming request. So the entire line tells Express whenever someone visits my site, they ask for a file like index.html, go look for it in the public folder and send it back. That is what this means, right? Now let's look at this. So now this part is actually handles errors or wrong URL. So if someone visits a page that doesn't exist, like if he types any, let's assume he types something like this, sign in, and this doesn't actually exist, so Express will respond with an HTTP status code 404, which means not found, right? So it send back its simple hypertext markup language message for page no found. So it's like having a polite message ready for visitors who take a wrong turn on your website, right? Then the last one is the port. We're going to be saying the port. Now this port is actually not static. You can you there you can change the port if another application is actually running on 3000, right? So you can explicitly set this. Now you are choosing a port number where your web server will run. So think of your computer like a big building with many doors. So each port can be used by different programs, right? So here we tell our web server to use door number 3000, which can be changed. So web server be available at this, right? So let's do this. Right, so ports, yeah, 3000. Let's use 3222. Okay. So the next line here, which is the last line, is output listing, which is a port, right? And then this is the message, the output message, right, which it will return. Right? Now this tells Express to start listening for visitor on the chosen port. So it's like saying start the engine and wait for people to visit my website on port 3000. So it is running and prints a confirmation message on the terminal, which this is a message we have put on the terminal here, right? So let's do this. Okay, so let me use in case. Okay. Okay. So that's all. We have set up our index.html, which runs the entire application. You can see this is just a simple setup. This will run the entire application, which the entire application will run in port 333. Now let's look at our public folder, which is the index folder. So I'll do shift 1. Now I've automatically created my HTML file, right? So let's call this title student information system. So we'll not be building HTML files here, but this we'll be looking at, before we build that, we'll be looking at CSS file now, module 2, CSS styling, and we're building the HTML, right? And also the JavaScript. I'll teach you guys the JavaScript, right? So with that, you can be able to understand how it works. So the core lesson of this course, of this particular module, is to understand how to structure your web page, how to set up your web page, so that we can be able to run this entire application here using the Visual Studio Code, which is the environment, and the integrated development environment, and the ExpressJS framework. So I'm not done. Let me just put my website is running, right? So let's go. We're not done with PowerPoint slides. Are we done? Yes, we're done, right? Then let's see. Let's run this. So to run this is node index.js, right? So it's actually running on port 333. So if I copy this, then I go to my browser. So my website is running, right? So it's actually seeing this default page. My website is running, right? So let's put, okay, hello world. I'm just a foolish developer. Where am I running this? Am I running it here? Okay, it's running here. Okay, this is 333. Is it 333? Let me check the ports again. Okay, it's running 333. So why is it running? Okay, my website is running. Hello world. I'm just a full developer. So we have set up this. You can see what is running, right? It didn't show something like this in the HTML, right? Right, so we didn't show this, so you can see it's running here. So our next video, we're going to be setting up our routing, we're going to be building our signing, other HTML forms, and we're going to be building our web components, right? So thank you and God bless you. If you have any question, feel free to ask me. You can see how easy it is to set up your ExpressJS framework. And remember, this video is to set it up, to make it run, and which we did. And also, our next video, we're going to be building usable web components, which are the header and footer. And we're going to be teaching the CSS styling on the next video, right? So please watch this video again and easily set it up. So we'll move ahead with the next lecture. Thank you and God bless.